in the vast, gleaming lobby of a luxury hotel in downtown Chicago. Unnoticed by most, a janitor's quiet act of kindness ripples out like a stone cast into still water. Nina, a woman whose hands knew the roughness of hard work and whose eyes carried the weight of deferred dreams, noticed a small boy standing alone, tears tracking down his cheeks. As she knelt to calm him, no one else stirred. Guests walked by. Staff averted their gaze. But somewhere above, the CEO of the hotel, Michael, caught sight of her. And in that moment, the invisible became impossible to ignore. This is a story about how a simple act can unravel prejudice and rewrite destinies. Nina's day began like any other. The sharp scrape of her mop against the polished marble floors echoed softly through the near-empty corridors. The scent of fresh linen mingled with the faint aroma of brewed coffee drifting from the staff lounge. Sunlight slanted through the high windows, catching motes of dust as if to spotlight her solitude. She moved methodically, wiping down surfaces, tucking stray papers into trash bins, smoothing bedspreads with practiced efficiency. Nobody really noticed Nina. Guests hurried past her, eyes fixed on their phones or conversations, barely sparing a glance to the woman in the plain uniform and scuffed shoes. Even the staff, bellboys and front desk clerks, treated her as if she was part of the wallpaper. Sometimes she caught snippets of their talk, the casual dismissal wrapped in the phrase, "Just the cleaning lady." The words stung, but she held herself steady. She was invisible, but not broken. Behind her calm demeanor, Nina's mind drifted to another time. She remembered her dreams vividly, as if they were photographs faded with age. Art school, the canvases waiting for her touch, the promise of a future shaped by creativity rather than cleaning carts. But life had other plans. Bills that couldn't wait. A family that needed her. A scholarship lost to the harshness of circumstance. She tucked those memories away like fragile glass, knowing they could shatter with one wrong word. Her coworkers rarely hid their opinions. Sometimes when she passed by the staff kitchen, she overheard their whispers. "That's not her level," one would say, shaking his head. Another might chuckle. "She's just here to mop floors, not climb ladders." Their eyes avoided hers, but the judgment was clear. Nina bore it with quiet dignity, though the loneliness nestled deep inside her like a dull ache. At the end of her shift, Nina sat on a worn bench in the break room, counting out her modest paycheck. Barely $12 an hour. She thought of the electricity bill due next week, the school supplies for her kids, the doctor's appointment she couldn't miss. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders, heavier than the mop bucket she dragged all day. It was then, as she wiped down a table near the hotel's grand entrance, that she saw him. A small boy, no older than 5, standing alone amid the polished floors and gleaming chandeliers. His little face was streaked with tears, eyes wide with confusion and fear. No parents, no guardian in sight. Guests walked past, distracted by their own worlds. Nina's heart clenched. For a moment, the noise of the lobby seemed to hush around her. She hesitated only a second before stepping forward. Kneeling down, she lowered herself to his level, softening her voice. "Hey there, buddy. Where are your mom and dad?" The boy sniffled, clutching a crumpled toy car. I don't know," he whispered. She smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "Okay, we're going to find them. You're safe with me." Her tone was calm but firm, a lifeline thrown into a sea of uncertainty. Around them, life continued. Staff bustled past, their eyes sliding over Nina and the child, as if they weren't there. One of the bellboys smirked and muttered, "She's up to something again." The dismissal stung, but Nina focused on the boy's trembling hand in hers. She pulled out her phone, dialing the hotel's front desk. Her voice was steady, despite the urgency. "There's a lost child here in the lobby. We need to find his parents." She gave details, a description, location, and then set off toward the security office, the boy's hand never leaving hers. The next minutes stretched thin with anxious waiting. Nina navigated the labyrinth of back hallways and service elevators, her steps echoing softly on the concrete. She relayed information, made calls, coordinated with the front desk and security. The bureaucratic pace gnawed at her nerves, but she held on, determined. Finally, footsteps approached. A pair of frantic parents burst into the lobby, scanning wildly until their eyes locked on their son. Relief flooded their faces, tears replacing worry. They rushed forward, enveloping the boy in hugs. "Thank you," the mother whispered, voice shaking as she turned to Nina. Nina gave a small nod, trying not to let her own emotions show. The moment was brief, the gratitude genuine but fleeting, swallowed up again by the constant buzz of hotel life. Unbeknownst to Nina, a tall figure stood nearby. Michael, the CEO. He had been observing from the mezzanine, drawn by the unusual stillness in the busy lobby. The way Nina had handled the situation, the calm authority in her voice, the care in her eyes, it unsettled his assumptions. Here was a woman he'd never noticed before, acting with a grace and responsibility that contradicted every stereotype he'd unconsciously held. Michael's brow furrowed. He watched as she returned to her mop and bucket, slipping back into the shadows of her routine. Something inside him stirred, a quiet challenge to the comfortable narratives of status and worth he'd long accepted. The day's light waned, casting long shadows across the hotel's marble floors. Nina wiped sweat from her brow, the boy's soft, "Thank you," still echoing in her mind. Around her, the hotel hummed on, indifferent to the quiet revolution unfolding in one small act. And somewhere above, Michael made a decision that would change everything. Not just for Nina, but for the world behind the polished facade. The janitor was no longer invisible. Michael sat behind his sleek mahogany desk, the late afternoon sun filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long stripes of light across the polished surface. The hum of the city below was distant, but inside the hotel's executive floor, an uneasy silence settled as he tapped his fingers thoughtfully. He had replayed the scene in the lobby over and over, the way Nina had knelt beside that lost boy, her voice steady, her presence calm. It was simple, yet it unsettled him. He summoned the hotel's operations manager, a sharp-eyed man named Reynolds, who entered briskly, already anticipating a new task. Michael wasted no time. "Tell me about Nina, the janitor." Reynolds shifted in his seat, clearing his throat. "She's been with us for 3 years, ma'am. Works the night shift mostly. Quiet, keeps to herself, doesn't cause trouble." He glanced down, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "Honestly, Michael, she's just a cleaning lady. Nothing out of the ordinary." Michael leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Nothing out of the ordinary. She handled that situation in the lobby today with more poise than some of our managers. Did anyone else step in?" "No, sir. She took charge. But that's not her level, if you know what I mean." Michael did. The subtext was thick, an unspoken boundary set by class and title, a rigid hierarchy he knew all too well. Still, something about Nina gnawed at him. Was he missing something by dismissing her so quickly? Later, in the staff break room, Nina sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The murmur of conversations fluttered around her like a distant storm. She felt eyes, subtle glances and whispers curling behind her back. She caught fragments. She's getting attention from upstairs now. What's she playing at? The words stung, but she kept her gaze steady on the chipped table in front of her. When her shift ended, Nina was startled by a knock at the staff door. It was Michael. His usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, as if he'd been pacing. "Nina." His voice was low, almost hesitant. "Can you come to my office? I want to talk." Her heart skipped, an odd mix of fear and hope swirling inside her chest. She nodded, wiping her hands on her uniform, and followed him up a winding corridor lined with framed photographs of the hotel's history. The elevator ride was brief, but felt endless. Michael's office smelled faintly of leather and cedarwood, a world away from the bleach and dust of Nina's daily routine. He gestured to a chair. "Sit, please." She sat, hands folded tightly in her lap. His eyes searched hers, as if weighing the courage behind her quiet demeanor. "I saw what you did today, with the boy." He paused, choosing his words. "Tell me about you, Nina. What brought you here?" The question hung in the air, heavy, with unspoken expectations. Nina's gaze dropped. She swallowed, then spoke slowly. "I used to study design. I wanted to be an artist. But life made me take a different path. I have kids to feed. Bills don't wait. So, here I am." Michael nodded, the weight of her story settling between them. "And the job? Does it fulfill you?" She hesitated. "It pays the bills. It's honest work. But sometimes I feel invisible, like I'm just part of the furniture." Her voice cracked slightly, the vulnerability raw. "I want more, but I'm not sure if that's meant for someone like me." Michael's face softened. "That's something I want to change." He paused, then added, "We've overlooked people like you for too long. It's a loss, not just for the company, but for all of us." The conversation was interrupted by a knock. It was Reynolds, looking uneasy. "Sir, some of the staff are talking. There's some resentment about the attention on Nina." Michael sighed. "Of course." He turned back to Nina. "You'll face resistance, but I want you involved in a new project. A chance to help improve conditions for everyone in roles like yours." Nina blinked, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "Me? Really?" Michael smiled, genuine this time. "You're exactly who I want." As Nina left the office, the hallway lights flickered softly overhead. Whispers followed her, but something had shifted in the air. She wasn't just a janitor anymore. She was a spark lighting a path no one had expected to walk. That night, under the harsh fluorescent lights of the staff room, Nina opened a worn notebook, jotting down ideas, communication skills, presentations, leadership. Words that once seemed distant now felt within reach. Exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but her mind buzzed with possibility. Weeks passed. Nina learned to speak up in meetings, to organize her thoughts with clarity. The hotel's upper floors buzzed with murmurs, some admiring, others skeptical. Yet when Nina stepped onto the stage for her first presentation, nerves fluttering like trapped birds in her chest, applause broke out. Genuine. Surprising. Michael watched from the sidelines, a quiet pride warming his chest. This was more than an employee shining. It was a wall crumbling. With the first success came a formal announcement. A new program aimed at supporting employees in entry-level positions, training, education, pathways to growth. It wasn't perfect. Resistance lingered, but the tide had begun to turn. Back in the break room, Nina caught the eyes of a few colleagues. Some nodded, tentative respect in their gaze. Others still whispered, but her smile held steady. One evening, as she packed her things, a younger housekeeper approached hesitantly. Nina, thanks for showing us what's possible. Nina's lips curved, tired but sincere. Oh, we all deserve a chance, she said softly, the promise unspoken but understood. In the quiet moments, Michael reflected on what he'd witnessed. Not just a janitor's kindness, but a human being's resilience and brilliance. He knew the real work was just beginning. The invisible had been seen, and the hotel would never be the same. The morning light filtered softly through the tall windows of the hotel's grand conference hall, casting a warm glow on the faces gathered there. Cameras clicked, voices murmured, and a subtle buzz of anticipation filled the air. Nina stood near the back, her hands clenched loosely at her sides, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The story of the janitor who had helped a lost child had spilled beyond the hotel's walls, sparking interest far beyond what she could have imagined. Reporters whispered questions, colleagues nodded with newfound respect, and strangers sent messages of encouragement she hadn't dared to hope for. Yet beneath the surface of this rising tide was a current of tension. The attention brought pressure, unspoken expectations, and the sudden visibility she'd never sought. Nina's heart thudded as she glanced at Michael, standing confidently at the front of the room, ready to address the crowd. He caught her eye briefly and offered a nod, a silent pact between two very different lives now intertwined. As Michael began to speak, his voice steady and clear, he recounted the moment he had first seen Nina in the lobby, the child in her gentle grasp, and the spark it ignited in him. He spoke of the company's long overdue reckoning, the launch of a foundation to support employees from low-level positions, and the promise of new opportunities. Applause rippled through the hall, yet Nina noticed the flicker of resistance in a few faces, quiet skepticism, old prejudices clinging stubbornly. Later, as cameras faded and the crowd thinned, Nina found herself surrounded by colleagues she barely knew, people sharing their own stories of struggle and hope. A young bellhop spoke softly of dreams deferred. A housekeeper recounted years of feeling invisible. Together, they formed a fragile web of solidarity, a community forged in the quiet corners of the hotel's sprawling halls. Days turned to weeks. The foundation grew, offering scholarships, training programs, and mentorship. Nina took on a role she'd never imagined: leader, advocate, symbol. She carried the weight with surprising grace, but every step forward felt hard-won. Some questioned her motives, others doubted her abilities, but she pushed on, drawing strength from the faces of those who believed. One afternoon, standing before a group of new trainees, Nina held up a small badge engraved with the words, "Leader of Change." The room was silent, the significance hanging thick in the air. She looked down at the badge, then back at the faces before her. "You don't have to be important to do important things," she said softly. "Weasel. We all deserve to be seen." The words resonated beyond the walls, a quiet challenge to a world that too often measures worth by status. But not everyone was convinced. Outside the hotel, critics emerged, skeptics who questioned the sincerity of the change, who dismissed Nina as a convenient symbol rather than a real force. In a tense moment, when a reporter asked her to defend the Foundation's impact, Nina met the gaze steadily. "I'm not here to prove anything to anyone," she said. "I'm here because people deserve dignity. That's not negotiable." Back inside, Michael watched as Nina spoke, the fire in her eyes illuminating the room. He saw in her the truth he'd long ignored, that leadership could come from the most unexpected places. His own perspective had shifted, quietly, but irrevocably. Months later, the hotel held a gathering unlike any before. The grand hall was filled with staff from every department and level. Michael stood before them, voice ringing with conviction. "Oh, we have all been part of something bigger than a business," he said. "Nina showed us what it means to care, to see each other, truly see. Let's keep building that world." Nina stepped forward, heart pounding but steady. She shared her story, not as a plea for sympathy, but as a call for respect. Her voice cracked with emotion, but the room held its breath, caught in the moment. A simple lunchbox rested on the podium, a worn, empty container that had become a symbol of the hard road traveled, the hunger for opportunity, and the hope for a better future. Silence settled over the crowd, thick and reverent. The empty lunchbox spoke louder than words ever could. Outside the hotel, news of the foundation inspired other businesses. Scholarships were launched, community programs funded. The ripples of change spread across the city and beyond. Nina, once unseen and unheard, had become a beacon, a reminder that true strength often lies beneath the surface, waiting for its moment. As she walked through the hotel's lobby one evening, the soft click of her shoes on the marble floor felt different now. No longer the sound of invisibility, but the steady rhythm of someone who had finally been seen.